Google, LinkedIn, Esri, AT&T, NBC Universal Comcast, Salesforce, Edison International, the community foundations, the California Teachers Association, and others. And they've been working diligently to bring forward specific ideas to address all aspects of the digital divide. In addition, we've been working with the other relevant private sector companies who are not members of the task force to make sure that we work collaboratively to get a comprehensive solution. In particular, the task force commends and appreciates the work of the internet service providers in our state and their long-standing efforts to provide connectivity to all Californians. But now we seek and need an even stronger partnership with them. During this time of distance learning and COVID-19, the internet service providers should and must increase their outreach regarding their affordable plan offerings, help deploy near-term connectivity solutions, as well as ensure that financially insecure families remain connected. We're also looking at a number of ways to provide technical support, including leveraging the community-based programs that are already working to advance digital literacy in our communities, and finding community volunteers to provide real-time assistance to people trying to learn online. Lastly, I just want to reiterate how thankful we all are to serve a governor that listens to scientists, puts public health first, and is willing to put together a bipartisan economic task force. A governor who says, put your partisanship aside, bring me your best ideas, and let's rebuild together. At a time of great division and emotion across our country, we are doing it together. That's how we're supposed to be in America, especially when times are tough. Thank you.
I appreciate the sentiment, and moreover, Tom, thank you for all your outstanding work leading this task force. We were able just a couple of days ago to lay out a lot of the things that you've already accomplished on that task force and a lot of the things that we'll be working with the legislature over the next few weeks to deliver. But none is more foundational in the fate and future of the state of California, to future-proof this state, to address the issue of equity, to address this divide, again, that transcends just our school system, but persists all throughout our society, then finally dealing with this digital divide in the state of California. No reason the state of California shouldn't lead the nation in this space. That's your resolve. It's our collective commitment, and we codified a lot of that based upon guidance and support that the 100-member task force provided, based upon guidance and support that a lot of key legislative leaders have provided, based upon the expertise we're able to source at the California Public Utilities Commission and elsewhere. We've put out today an executive order, quite literally codifying a lot of those recommendations, a lot of those thoughts. We have specific goals as it relates to not just access to the internet, but quality access. And we're talking in terms of a goal of 100 megabytes of download speed, which should be a foundational pursuit for all of us across this country. I mean, that's close to fiber-like speeds, but that's where we need to be if we're going to be globally competitive and provide the quality of education, regardless of our backgrounds, that people deserve. We put out new mapping expectation. That was Tom's reference to Esri and others. New data collection, more transparency, more accountability. We have some strategies on funding, working with the legislature, and what Superintendent Thurman referenced, some of the legislative pursuits that are currently underway, and new expectation in terms of time to delivery and deployment and adoption. We also have dusted off this old broadband council that existed, in a world that no longer exists, or at least was conceived in a world that no longer exists. We're still in sort of the dial-up mode in some of our thinking, and so we're going to be upgrading their work and put together a new action plan that has to be fundamentally reimagined moving forward. So just wanted folks to know there's progress in that space. It's in the thematic that we're advancing here today as it relates to digital divide and distance learning for our kids, but it's, again, foundational for our economic future as well. Speaking about our future, no one more committed to the future of this state than the leader, president of our school system in the state of California, Linda Darling Hammond. Many of you know her well in terms of her advocacy and support, particularly for people with special needs, the work she did at Stanford University in her own right, an NGO she leads internationally, not just nationally, connected to this cause and constantly providing leading edge thoughts and leading edge advice. We are just so blessed she took this formal role here in the state of California. But in that role, Linda has been working with local districts on the application, not of why we need to do distance learning, not what we need to do in terms of putting those guardrails in place, but how to deliver it from a bottom-up, not just top-down perspective. She wants to talk a little bit more about that work. And Linda, if you could just amplify the legitimate concerns we have as someone with my own learning disabilities, recognizing the challenges with two of my kids in that place, and the needs to help special needs students in the state of California. I'd love you as well just talk a little bit about that after you move forward with your broader presentation on the work you're doing at the local level.
Glad to do that, and thanks, Governor, for all that you're doing to move this state forward in all the ways we've been talking about. I want to give us a small glimpse of what's happening in the field. How are our school systems stepping up in respect to all of the initiatives that we've just described? I checked in with school leaders in a number of large and small districts this week, and as the state superintendent said, educators in California really are leaning in, both on the quality of distance learning and the equity concerns that we have put front and center. We've come a long way since spring in figuring out how to do this work. When schools were physically closed in March, school districts scrambled to figure out how to purchase devices. There were supply chain problems, how to get 20% of households without Wi-Fi wired up, how to help teachers learn how to effectively teach online. Since then, a lot has happened. Our 58 county offices of education have stepped up in a big way to help districts with technology and training. 4 of these counties, Kern, Orange, San Bernardino, and San Diego, have launched a distance learning consortium through the CCEE, which provides curriculum units and lesson plans, as well as training for teachers. Many have created their own digital equity task forces to purchase and distribute computers. The California Department of Education and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence have been providing guidance, toolkits, webinars, and professional learning opportunities, as we heard. Districts have spent the summer gearing up to ensure quality and equity in distance learning. In talking to school leaders this week, in districts ranging from our biggest districts in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Long Beach, to tiny, high-poverty rural districts like Elk Hills, which is 30 miles east of Bakersfield, and San Lucas, which is in a part of Monterey County that has no streetlights or sidewalks. I've heard how all of those districts have ensured that 100% of their students can have laptops and hotspots in settings ranging from households to homeless shelters. A huge amount of learning has really gone on. San Diego and Elk Hills held focus groups with parents to learn about what worked and what did not work last spring, what families need. That guided their plans for common online platforms and instructional approaches in the fall. Los Angeles learned more about how to offer effective online instruction by offering summer school to all, and more than 100,000 students showed up, studying reading and math, of course, but also music and the arts. Thousands of them took guitar lessons with instruments donated by Fender Guitars. They've got another 2,000 coming this year because they're committed to having the arts side by side with math and social studies and science and English language arts in their curriculum. I heard from all of these districts how schools are organized to ensure that students will have daily face-to-face instruction covering the core instructional areas, plus PE and the arts in large and small groups and in one-to-one settings where those are needed to meet special needs. And every one of these districts had really thought through how to get services, wraparound services to students with special education needs, even online, but they're interested as soon as it's made viable to bring small groups back face-to-face. The staff have learned how to use platforms and Zoom breakout rooms and chat boxes and how to work more effectively with parents and students in these virtual settings. In San Diego, parents and students, along with teachers, will have professional development at the start of the school year, August 31st for them. They'll all learn how to engage daily in the online learning and the project work that is going to occur in each of the subjects, as well as how to access teachers during their office hours for one-to-one problem solving. In Los Angeles, school starts next week. In addition to the daily classes in all their content areas, students who are in need will be able to access free online tutoring to anyone who needs it. In Long Beach, starting September 1st, the district has more than enough laptops and hotspots for every child. The courses are planned and ready. And as was true last spring, they've identified excellent teachers who do a terrific job of distance learning, who are offering classes in specialty subjects online. As many students as want to can come. Last spring, some of them drew over 2,000 students, and some will be offering demonstration lessons online for other teachers who want to learn their approaches. In Elk Hills, school started this week. 100% of students were connected and in attendance by day 2 of classes. This district has overhauled all of its curriculum plans in the subject areas to use technology to accelerate learning. They've got social emotional learning leading off every day, and that's also common across these districts. And finally, in very rural San Lucas, every student has been provided with a new laptop and internet service, but as you and Tom Steyer and others were describing, Wi-Fi is still sometimes unreliable. So the district has prepared a plan B and a plan C. If the Wi-Fi fails, the students can call in to join the class and talk to the teacher. Students also have paper backups for backup if they can't get through online. Every week, the staff will convene to figure out how to reach any children who are not able to engage that week, including making socially distanced house calls. They've got a mobile science lab that will provide free brown bag science projects. Every week, they'll offer reasons to come to school, ranging from Music Mondays with dance videos to Travel Tuesdays with virtual field trips and Wacky Wednesdays with silly dress options and crazy hair days for online meetings with prizes from local organizations. So everyone is leaning in. The creativity that our educators are showing in addressing this moment and in keeping equity front and center in this work is encouraging. We'll certainly encounter more challenges, but California is learning how to do this work. And at the end of the process, if we continue to double down, when we go back to school in person, we're likely to have an entire school system, students and staff that are more technologically proficient, stronger connections between home and school because people have had to figure out how to do that, and more capacity to support learning progress than we had before. I'm glad to answer additional questions, particularly on the issue of meeting the needs of our English learners and special education students. I can say that in every case where I talked to school leaders, this was front of mind for them, and very creative approaches to trying to figure out how to use small Zoom breakout rooms for paraprofessionals to work with the students with special needs, one-on-one meetings with specialists, as well as with classroom teachers, and eagerness to get back to school in person.
Right. And Linda, perhaps just, if I may, just because I think it's important, the guidelines we put out recently afford the ability for districts to make a determination for those with acute needs to allow in-person instruction, even with the broader guidelines we put out. Maybe you can just amplify that. I know there's additional work being done in that space, but as a foundational principle, that is one that we have advanced through your leadership, Tony Thurmond's leadership.
Yeah, and we, many districts are prepared to offer small group settings, even while schools are closed, in the way that child care settings are allowed to operate, with all of the rules that you reviewed for us earlier, to be able to bring back in person those students whose needs are difficult to meet online and are much better met in person. We are working through guidance with the California Department of Public Health that should be released this coming week that will allow school districts, in collaboration and consultation with their local public health department, to convene these small groups of students in safe ways that allow their needs to be met in person.
I appreciate that. More on that subject, but I appreciate you just setting forth the broader tenure of expectation in terms of our recognition that there are simply kids that will never, ever have that quality learning that we all desire to advance online, no matter what kind of support we provide, even if we individualize it. And so we'll require even more. And so thank you for all of your work in that space, and including just your incredible advocacy. It's a space, I don't want to get off topic, but over the last year and a half, the budgets that we have preserved, even in this economy, and the budgets we substantially enhanced last year, were in the special education space, and we recognize we have enormous amount of work still left to do. Again, as I said, closing things out, bottom line, learning is non-negotiable, but neither is safety. With that, let me briefly go through the issue that brings many of you to these press conferences and quickly update you on the latest number of positive cases that we have brought in since August 13th. You'll see a number there of 7,934, as was the case on Wednesday. Before you jot that number down, consider that this will be the last day we will have to report backlogged cases related to backlog that many of you are very familiar with. Of the 7,934, 4,429 are backlog cases, putting our new case number today at 3,505. So this was the day we committed to reporting out our efforts to clean up that backlog, bring all the positive cases related to the backlog of total cases, roughly 295,000 cases. A lot of those will be deduplicated, and roughly 20,000 positives in that cohort. On Monday, we're going to break down by county a detailed list so people will have, with clarity and precision, every single number, again, on the county-by-county basis. But this completes our efforts, 100% of our efforts to address the backlog, to update our case numbers, and that's exactly what we're doing here on this slide and on this slide. Our positivity rate now in the state of California averaging 137,000 tests a day. And I'll repeat that. We're averaging 137,000 tests a day, 188,000 a few days back, 111,000 that came in yesterday. Averaging 137,000 cases. We have a positivity rate, percentage of people that test positive for COVID-19 versus the total number of people that were tested of 6.2% over the last 14-day period. Last time I presented the positivity rate, it was at 7.0%. Today, at 6.2%, moving as we asserted a few weeks back and certainly asserted last week in a positive direction. You could see here, and you unpack this, the 14-day look at the positivity rate, see where it was even pre the last presentation at 7.0, over 7.3, dropping down, stabilizing, bouncing around a little bit in the last 7 or so days. Not surprisingly, and in accordance with trends that we have presented consistently over the course of months, positivity rates, hospitalizations, ICUs, having a relational construct here. Hospitalization numbers continue to decline. 14-day number, 19.9% decrease, 20% decrease over a 14-day period. That's an encouraging sign. I remind you, as I always do, this is total number in the aggregate. None of us live in the aggregate. Each and every one of you lives somewhere, to the extent you're watching this within the state of California, somewhere in the state. Hospitalization numbers may vary, may be very different in terms of outlook and concerns for you. That's why we have a county monitoring list, reminding you the state's population is larger than 21 state populations combined. But in the aggregate, the state of California has experienced a roughly 20% decrease in hospitalization patients that have identified COVID-19 in the last 14 days. The last slide presentation, last Monday, you saw numbers as high as 9% total capacity in the hospital system, bed capacity filled with COVID-19 patients. We're now at 7%. ICU admissions down some 14.3%, roughly 14%. Basically tracking where hospitalizations are. That's an encouraging sign. We need to see more stability. We need to see that line continue to bend in this direction. We're not out of the woods. Do not take that snapshot, by the way, of 33 or so hundred positive cases to assume anything. The trend over a 14-day period shows a much higher number than that, but we are seeing a trend nonetheless that is moving in the right direction because of all of your outstanding work. Thank you to everybody watching. Thank you to 40 million Californians and those that have really done their best to be responsible not only to their own health, but to their friends, family, loved ones, and the broader community and the society we're trying to rebuild after this pandemic. Care capacity in the ICUs down to about 20% from 22-23. And so you see that reflected in the pie chart. Again, encouraging numbers, putting a little less pressure on the system, but again, that pressure persists in certain parts, certain regions of the state, disproportionately now, as we've been very clear about in the Central Valley. 8 counties that continue in that valley to be top of mind of concern and consideration. But even in the Central Valley, we're seeing in most cases, not every case, most case, a rate of growth that's beginning to decline, but still growth that is of concern. As the superintendent said, I don't have to always say it, please wear a mask, continue to physically distance. These are rules and guidelines that we put out within our education system when, not if, we reopen for in-person learning. That will happen, if you ask when that will happen, sooner than later if we continue to wear a mask and continue to take seriously the need to physically distance, including this weekend, where we now have a new flex order that just came out from Cal ISO, independent system operator. That basically means those are the experts as it relates to energy consumption in the state. They wanted me to tell you that this flex warning that they put out today means it would be helpful to the entire electrical delivery system in the state of California if you can, to the extent warranted and possible, reduce your electricity consumption between the hours of 3 and 8 p.m. We're seeing triple-digit temperatures. I think I read they're anticipating Death Valley temperatures to go to a record of 127 degrees. That's in our state. That's not some distant land overseas. The next 7, 8, 9, 10 days, we're going to experience record-breaking temperatures, as the case in any jurisdiction on the globe. That means we can all do well just to be thoughtful about our electricity and energy consumption. So if you wanted to remind your kids when you walk out of a room to turn the lights off, this is the time to do it, particularly between the hours of 3 and 8. When you're out there this weekend, because of those triple-digit temperatures, we encourage you to physically distance, avoid as much mixing as you possibly can, maintain your vigilance as it relates to your own personal hygiene, and washing your hands being the most impactful thing you can do. So that's a very long-winded presentation. Forgive me, but I don't know anything more important to parents out there in the state of California than the subject matter that brings us to this hour. And I also want to just again thank the head of our State Board of Education Linda Darling Hammond, and thank the Superintendent of Public Education, Tony Thurman. Thank you to the co-chair of our Economic Recovery Task Force, Tom Steyer, for their participation, their presentations here today, and all of them stand by with me to answer any questions.
Hannah Wiley, SAC-B.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for taking questions. Pivoting a little bit here, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals today struck down the 2016 law banning possession of high-capacity firearm magazines. So my question is, do you plan to take action? Will California respond to this? And what's the next step moving forward on California's part?
Well, I'm very proud of working to lead that effort, also working with legislative leaders, Governor Brown, others that were instrumental in advancing that collective cause. California's leadership as it relates to gun safety, second to none in this nation. I'll remind everybody, a gun, respectfully, has never killed anybody unless the gun is used as a blunt instrument. The gun requires a dangerous and deadly component, and that is a bullet. Ammunition. It's a rather interesting fact in this state for over a quarter century. Not in this country, however. We have background checks, comprehensive background checks, at least here in the state of California, on gun purchases, but not on its deadly component. And so we've long advanced efforts to focus not just on guns, but also focus on keeping those dangerous components out of the hands of people that otherwise should not be afforded that fundamental privilege/right. Large capacity magazine clips, with respect, I think, fall into that category. There's been local ordinances that have been upheld by the courts. The state ordinance, I haven't had the chance to read the decision. It just came out. When I do, I'll have a chance to respond in detail to your question about what our next steps are. But I think it was sound. I think it was right. And I think that the overwhelming, I know the overwhelming majority of Californians agreed when they supported a ballot initiative that we put forth asking them for their opinion on this subject as well.
Patrick Healy, NBC4.
Thank you very much. Mr. Governor, a couple of questions, one related to COVID and one related to the problems with the United Parcel Service, USPS Postal Service. Doubts whether or not it will be able to deliver the volume of mail-in ballots for the November election. Is there anything that the state of California can do to deal with that? And the COVID question in schools is related to what Linda Darling Hammond was talking about. These small groups of students with special needs being able to convene in person. Can that occur in the counties on the watch list? And when will the specific guidance for that be coming out?
No,
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And since I open up that door and open up the conversation in anticipation, rightfully, that someone may bring it up, it's certainly one we've been talking about for months now. Linda, you're still on the phone, and if you could answer that question, and maybe you can also amplify it, talking a little bit about just a broad strokes preview of some of these care center concepts that are also being formalized throughout the state.
Right. So even as we speak, child care centers do operate for essential workers and so on in various parts of the state, including the counties on the watch list. Those guidelines that have been created can be developed further for a similar kind of convening in school districts that are on the watch list, counties that are on the watch list, to convene very small groups that are in small cohorts that do not interact with other cohorts, that are able to work with staff, on particular kinds of learning. That would be in counties that are on the watch list that have where the framework for the provision of those services, meets a whole set of guidelines. Similarly, there are places in the state that are figuring out how to offer settings for children to come to for distance learning if they're in a place that cannot receive internet, or where there's not a parent at home, or if they need additional support. In San Francisco, the Department of Children Families and Youth is creating some of these kinds of essentially child care-like settings, small groups with social distancing, face coverings, and support of adults to be sure that kids are supported even during distance learning. So that, as I said, is something that's being worked through in terms of the guidelines and will be available probably within the week for consideration by school districts.
Appreciate it. The question is a very sensitive one and very poignant and personal one for hundreds of thousands of families in this state. And so I appreciate, Linda, you're illuminating a little bit more about what's already happening in this space, but moreover, some of the more specific prescriptive guidelines we'll be putting out. Again, a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety on parents, on students, these kids, our kids themselves, and our teachers and paraprofessionals and others. And I just want to say to all the teachers and paraprofessionals, thank you. Thank you for working through your own anxieties, your own fears, your own concern about your own personal health. Many of you have kids yourself that need support in addition to the kids that you are supporting every day in our virtual classrooms. I know all of you got into education for equity purposes, overwhelming majority did, to right wrongs, to address the issue of social mobility, and care deeply about learning disabilities and learning differences and the needs, the special needs that so many of your students have. So again, a lot of work being done, a lot of anxiety in this space, and know that we've got a good team, Linda and her team, and of course, great work of our superintendent that are resolved for the long haul to address these issues. Let me just quickly address the issue as it relates to what's happening or not happening with some of the sabotage that's clearly intentionally being done to our postal delivery here in this country. This is going to impact not just elections, it's going to impact your ability to get quality care in terms of your prescriptions, to get information, to be able to correspond with loved ones and the like. Vulnerable populations disproportionately being impacted because of their utilization of our postal system. I haven't experienced this in my lifetime. I don't know that any of us have. The weaponization of sorts of our postal system. Here's an answer to your question. I am not a member of the federal government, but however, as a federal taxpayer, I demand and expect more of our country, and that first needs to be called out. I'm not alone in calling that out, and I don't know that this, by any stretch, is even a partisan issue. I think vast majority of us, regardless of our political stripes, would assess the situation accordingly and assert, I think, similar sentiment around legitimate concern about sorting systems vanishing, around concerns around just basic, fundamental, life-saving delivery that has been part of our proud history as it relates to our postal service. It's Americana, it's apple pie, and I'll throw in baseball. That being said, it relates to the issue of what the state can do. Let me tell you what we've done. I signed 2 executive orders a number of months ago to jumpstart the process, working with our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, on mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots are well known and well utilized here in the state of California. Increasing numbers every election of people using absentee ballots, which are mail-in ballots, very effectively and very safely. The numbers increase every single year, but not everybody wants the benefit of a mail-in ballot, even in a pre-COVID environment. They want the in-person experience. There's something that is very touching and emotional about that. I'll be honest, that's my preferred source of voting. There's something about Election Day, bringing your kids, as I have last few times, and sort of teach them civics. That's deeply emotional and it attaches very deeply very deeply in my memory from the first time I was able to vote. We want to provide those points of access as well. And that was the second executive order I signed, to provide access points for drop-off that is not just to the Postal Service, drop-offs of ballots that you may have filled out at home but want to drop off in person, provisional ballots and the like, and the work that obviously needs to be done for people that otherwise are not accessing or cannot, for other limitations and challenges, the absentee or mail-in ballots. Those two executive orders were codified. Thank you to the leadership of the California legislature. They passed two pieces of legislation, and I recently just signed them to double down on those commitments. But we also did this. We have a provision that allows 17 days to collect ballots. If it's postmarked, we will give the ability for our registrars to get those things collected and, moreover, certified, but over a 17-day period. We thought that was important with all the uncertainty of COVID. We didn't realize how prescient, not just important, that now appears to have been with what has happened with some of what I would describe almost as vandalism of our postal system. And so I hope this is a temporary moment. I hope cooler heads will prevail. I hope Congress will work with the president to address his concerns and work together to build this into the next stimulus package, put aside our differences. I expect and believe that will happen. I say not just as an optimist, but I think as a pragmatist as well. It's in everyone's interest that this get resolved, but in California's interest, we have a 17-day window if indeed there are delays.
Hey, Governor Newsom, thanks, as always, for giving us some time. We've asked you about this before, but there are now two wealth tax proposals for the legislature pushed in particular by teacher unions who say they're going to need that money to be able to reopen safely. They've made clear that this is going to be one for next year, so I think we can count on that being at the top of the agenda for them. Is that a proposal that you would be potentially willing to entertain, the idea of some sort of wealth tax to help fund schools? Yeah,
I haven't looked at it. Now, we have an initiative on the ballot to do just that. So, look, I want to see where things go over the next few months. We passed a budget that closed a $54.3 billion shortfall. We did it on the basis of a lot of support from the federal government. We did it with some expectation of additional support, including to our public education system. We anticipate gaps in our budget next year in roughly $8.7 to $9 billion. So we project a shortfall into the future. And so we'll be working we have been working very diligently to address that shortfall. I have a presentation that I'm already working on to the legislature, a January budget proposal. So as far as I'm concerned, you have to be considerate and open to what the conditions provide for. And so we'll anticipate things passing on the ballot, perhaps things falling short. What happens if this passes? What happens if this doesn't pass? What is the next step? What's the next consideration? I haven't read this. I saw a press release, or moreover, I saw some reporting on a wealth tax. I will just say this, though. We're the state of California, not the United States of America. I thought the tax cut that President Trump advanced was a huge mistake, a colossal mistake that will impact our kids and grandkids. You saw that demonstrably so in one of the most robust economic expansion periods in American history, one the president clearly inherited from the previous administration, that we were running historic deficits. That was only possible because, it was aided certainly by that historic tax cut where many companies and individuals weren't even asking for it. I thought that was a mistake, and I'm looking forward to a Biden administration to right that wrong and fix that. I think at a state level, it's a way of long-windedly making this point, you have to be careful about taking national constructs, which may be appropriate for a nation, and having state-by-state constructs until and unless you consider the impacts of those decisions on your ability to retain and attract talent, individuals, companies, and your competitiveness. Everything needs to be considered in that light. And I would encourage those that are making proposals in this space to consider those impacts in relationship to what may or may not be happening in other parts of this nation. So for me, the issue of taxation issue is, for me, one where, as a federal construct, it means one thing. As a state and even at a local level, one has to consider the impacts of these decisions in terms of our competitive environment, in terms of all of those factors as well.
Corin Hoggard, ABC 30.
Good afternoon, Governor. We have a fairly sizable private religious school here in Fresno County that opened for in-person instruction yesterday, then got a public health officer order to close, and yet they opened again today despite that order. So can you talk to us about the consequences for that, both from the public health perspective and also the legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I had the privilege of at least a moment of education in Catholic schools. We were taught to respect rules and regulations. And so I'm disappointed, obviously, that they're not abiding by their local health officer, whose purpose it is simply to keep people healthy, keep people safe, not only the kids, but the leadership of that school and others. So by definition, I'm disappointed in that, particularly as someone who grew up in the church and has profound reverence, not just respect for its teachings. And maybe this, for me, not maybe, this provides a bit of a disconnect in that respect, because I think we operate from a communitarian perspective, at least in terms of the religious teachings that I was afforded. And I think as it relates to this pandemic and how easily transmitted this disease is, and how impacted this state and our economy and our nation and the world has been, that we'd all do well to abide by our local health officers. And so the system we set up was designed exactly as it's now operating. The local health officer doing the right thing to the extent that this school, unfortunately, is choosing not to model good behavior and doing the right thing. And to the extent that the county will be involved and to the extent the state needs to be involved, we'll consider that. So look, I'm not, what happens in these instances, the governor sort of points something out and people, react and everybody flexes their muscles. I'm not trying to flex any muscle here. All I am is trying to encourage people to stay safe, stay healthy, because my absolute goal is one I think the leaders of the school share, and that's to keep our kids safe, to keep them educated. Our default remains in-person education for all of the reasons that we've stated and all the reasons I know that the leadership of that school believes in. But we can do that by moving quickly to eradicate and mitigate the spread of this disease, get the treatments, and ultimately get to a vaccine. The sooner we do that, as soon as we model good behavior and don't send mixed messages, then the sooner all of us go back to school and we all achieve our respected goals. And so that's my hope and expectation, and I say that with deep love and deep reverence for the teachings of that school.
Final question, Margaret Carrero, KNX.
Yes, Governor, thank you so much for taking questions. I'm hoping you could speak to a little bit about California becoming the first state with 600,000 confirmed cases of COVID, and speak a little bit more to the specifics of today's executive order, if you could.
Yeah, I think the 6.2% positivity rate is a very encouraging sign. I think it's interesting, California, while we may have gotten a slower start than we otherwise wanted, it's a stubborn start as it relates to testing. We've been able to step up our testing in a meaningful way. It's still not where I believe we should be and where I'm committed to taking the state in terms of total number of tests. But we are punching above our weight now in terms of our efforts to really get a sense of what is the background rate of infections, what's the community spread of this disease. We're not shying away from that. We're not playing in the political frame that somehow tests are bad because they were, by definition, show a higher count of total number of positives. But the number that really matters to us, the one that I'm not as fixated on as perhaps others are, is that positivity rate that gives us a better sense of what's really happening in terms of the community spread. What's happening in our hospitals is foundational. What's happening in the ICUs is foundational. Obviously, that leads to concerns and obvious issues related to morbidity, mortality. And so that's where our energies are. But I'm not going to back off on more tests because I fear a question like yours or concern about total number of cases. You have a responsibility. This nation, I think, deserves to have a better sense to know how prevalent is this disease. And I can assure you it's exponentially, well, maybe not exponentially, it's significantly, I would argue, more prevalent than those numbers, even in California, suggest. And it's simply because we haven't put the testing protocols in place and we haven't scaled our testing capacity as the most innovative nation on the planet. And so that includes California. We've got work to do. We've got this X Prize we put out. We got this new testing task force that's been instructed to be more creative in terms of new testing strategies, new in-home testing strategies, non-PCR testing strategies, and we'll be looking forward to announcements in that space, or I hope you'll look forward to them very, very soon. So that's just that's it broadly on a nutshell. You'll see the executive order. Forgive me, I don't want to belabor this, but we have that executive order. It should be up online and available to you. It's multiple pages. You'll see the details in the executive order in terms of this broadband council and some of our new goals and expectations on 100 megabits and bytes rather, and other strategies to improve and expand our efforts that Tom and his team have been working on for many, many months. So that's a long day for all of you that have been tuning in. Thank you for privilege of your time and attention. I want to thank my team, Ben Cheetah in particular, for all his hard work in terms of the education guidance, and Dr. Pan, who's with us today, and her outstanding work working with the counties. They'll be working overtime this weekend to clarify any final details. So we really wanted to get that presentation to a point where everybody's 100% on the same page, and that will happen Monday. We'll get that new updated monitoring list out and about, work with those elementary schools that are looking to do these waivers. Many of them have already submitted waivers, and we look forward to the EPI data coming out Monday to help advance that cause as well. With that, continue the cause of good hygiene, wearing a face mask, be safe, and try to avoid mixing this very hot weekend. And between 3 and 8, if you could, ISO would be pleased. Maybe turn off a few lights if you could, to help us with our energy grid. Take care, everybody.